Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away on Friday, and now the political world is in an absolute frenzy. The big question is, should Trump be allowed to appoint a Supreme Court nominee this close to the election? My answer is yes, I think he should be able to, and I'm going to explain my reasoning. And also, if you are more liberal, I'm hopefully going to quell some of your fears about a more conservative-leaning court. That is all coming up. But first, please subscribe to this channel, and if you'd like to support the show, the links are down below. So let's go ahead and get right into this. Now, Trump says that he's going to be naming a nominee by the end of the week, no later than Saturday. He says that the nominee will be a woman. I don't think this is a surprise to any of us after what happened in the Kavanaugh hearing with the accusations about sexual assault. So I think, it's a smart move on his part to nominate a woman, and we'll see who this nominee ends up being. There is a short list. There's a lot of names being thrown around, and we'll get into those nominees and deeper into, whoever the nominee is, deeper into some of their previous court rulings, if they have any. We'll get into that in a later date when the nominee's actually been named. So I don't think there's any doubt that Mitch McConnell is a giant hypocrite. He has shown his true colors, like he has many times before, that he is a complete partisan hypocrite, and that cannot be disputed. Now, back in 2016, when Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland, Mitch McConnell said this.
One might say this is an almost unprecedented moment in the history of our country. Been more than 80 years since a Supreme Court vacancy arose and was filled in a presidential election year. And that, Mr. President, was when the Senate majority and the president were from the same political party.
He also used Joe Biden's views against him, saying that this was further reason to not put forward a nominee in an election year. Here's what he says about Joe Biden.
Senator Joseph R. Biden, Jr., Democrat, Delaware, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has urged President Bush not to fill any vacancy that might open up on the Supreme Court until after the November election.
So you see, Joe Biden made that same case, the same argument. Mitch McConnell then used it in 2016. Now, remember, Merrick Garland was nominated in March of 2016. That was a solid 8 months before the election, 10 months before a new sitting president would be in the Oval Office. And now we're 2 months away from the election, 4 months away from a potential new president sitting in the Oval Office. And here's what he has to say about the new Supreme Court nominee that would happen this election year.
The nominee for this vacancy will receive a vote on the floor of the Senate. Now, already, some of the same individuals who tried every conceivable dirty trick to obstruct Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh are lining up to proclaim the third time will be the charm. The Senate has more than sufficient time to process a nomination. History and precedent make that perfectly clear.
So he's a complete hypocrite. Look, if you were a Republican who was against Merrick Garland being put forward for a vote in 2016 because you argued it was an election year, then you also need to remain consistent and say the same thing about this year's pick. You would need to remain consistent and say, listen, Trump should not be able to put forward a nominee, or he could do what he wants, but the Senate shouldn't hold hearings and a vote of that nominee until after the election. That would make you consistent and logical and sound in your reasoning. Now, for me, the reason why I believe Trump should be allowed to put forward a nominee and the Senate should hold a vote is because I believed Obama should have had that same right with Merrick Garland, and I believe Merrick Garland should have absolutely had his Senate hearings and the vote. I believe if you are a sitting president and you have a Supreme Court vacancy, you should fill that vacancy even up until the last day you're in office. I don't believe in this election year hoopla because You're going to say, okay, well, it's an election year, and therefore you basically don't get to do anything as a president during an election year. And then you could always push that date back further and further. And you say, well, it's not just an election year now, but it's election year and 1 month. Yeah, it's 1 month away from an election year. Then it's, well, why not 2 months away from an election year? Why not 3 months away from an election year? Why not 2 years away from an election year? I don't want to see that goalpost move. To me, if you are the president of the United States and you are sitting in the Oval Office, you have full power of that Oval Office until the day you don't. And that's it. End of discussion, end of debate. A sitting president gets to make all of the decisions a sitting president gets to make up until the day he's no longer a sitting president. So personally, I felt like Obama should have absolutely nominated Merrick Garland in an election year. I believe Merrick Garland should have absolutely gotten his day in the Senate and a vote. And I then have to remain consistent and think the same thing about Donald Trump. Now, I know we could do this whole tit for tat. Well, but they put the block on Merrick Garland, so we need to put the block on them. We could go down this really petty road and continue to do these tit for tats. But it's bad for democracy. It's bad for our government. It's bad for our nation to continue this child's play. We have to get out of the sandbox, and we need to start acting like adults. And I would like to see the Democrats right now attempt to act like adults. I know it's very difficult for anyone in politics to act like one, but now would be a good time to start. I understand that there are a lot of stakes on the line. A lot of people say, you know what, or the stakes are high. I always get my metaphors mixed up. My dad always complains about that. One thing I hate is you can't get your metaphors right. Okay, the stakes are high. And look, so I understand that there is a lot of fear about a 6-3 conservative majority court, but we're going to get into that here in a little bit. One thing, though, that I want to bring up is we wouldn't even be in this situation had Democrats not changed the rules in 2013. And this is kind of what always happens. Democrats want to make a rule change, and the rule change comes back to bite them in the arse. And this is exactly what happened. And Mitch McConnell even said in 2013, don't do this, you are going to regret it. So let me tell you about what happened. What happened was in 2013, the Democrats had control of the Senate. It was Harry Reid. He was the Senate Majority Leader. Mitch McConnell was the Senate Minority Leader. Obama couldn't get through some judicial nominees to the federal district courts. So the Democrats decided to do something unprecedented. They decided to go nuclear. What that meant was, rather than the typical 60-vote majority that the Senate needs in order to pass through certain big things, there's certain things that the Senate, in order for them to pass whatever that is, they need a super majority, not just a simple majority of 51 votes. Judicial nominees, judicial confirmations require that 60-vote threshold. You need to get a majority, a big majority, not just a simple majority of the senators agreeing on this. The reason for this is, for one, it creates a scenario where if you are the president, like Donald Trump is today, and you're going to put forward a judicial nominee, you would need to put forward somebody you think is going to get those 60 votes. You now know you only have, 53, 54 Republicans in the Senate, and so you need to persuade a handful of Democrats to come over to your side. The only way you can do that is if you select somebody a little bit more moderate, not somebody to the far left or the far right, depending on who the sitting president is. So in Trump's case, had we still had this 60-vote majority rule, he would have to put forward somebody a little bit less than ultra-conservative. But since the Democrats changed the rules in 2013, Trump now can put forward an extremely right-wing ultra-conservative person, and there's not much the Democrats can do about it. That person only needs to get 50 senators to vote for them and Mike Pence to walk in there and break that tie. Now, let me read from you an article of 2013 of when the Democrats changed this rule. They were really upset that they couldn't get these judges through. They couldn't get that 60 majority because they didn't have 60 Democratic senators. They would have to compromise with Republicans. They didn't want to compromise with Republicans, or Republicans didn't want to compromise with them. And so they decided to go nuclear. What that meant was they lowered that threshold from 60 votes down to a simple majority of 51. Now, here's the article, Washington Post. saying, read, Democrats trigger nuclear option, eliminate most filibusters on nominees. Senate Democrats took the dramatic step Thursday of eliminating filibusters for most nominations by presidents, a power play they said was necessary to fix a broken system, but one that Republicans said would only rupture it further. And I think now, fast forward, that was in 2013. Fast forward now to 2020, I think we can see how this has definitely ruptured it further. Democrats used a rare parliamentary move to change the rules so that federal judicial nominees and executive office appointments can advance to confirmation votes by a simple majority of senators, rather than the 60-vote supermajority that has been the standard for nearly 4 decades. The immediate rationale for the move was to allow the confirmation of 3 picks by President Obama to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, the most recent examples of what Democrats have long considered unreasonably partisan obstruction by Republicans. In the long term, the rule change represents a substantial power shift in a chamber that for more than 2 centuries has prided itself on affording more rights to the minority party than any other legislative body in the world. Now a president whose party holds the majority in the Senate is virtually assured of having his nominees approved with far less opportunity for political obstruction. That was 2013. Fast forward to 2020, did the Democrats in 2013 ever envision a Donald Trump presidency? No, they did not. They don't think ahead. They make these rule changes. They call for these rule changes like they currently are calling for more rule changes when it comes to electoral college and eliminating the filibuster. Bad ideas, guys, because ultimately, even though you think it helps you in the short term, it will ultimately bite you in the arse in the long term. And that is what we're seeing here today. The American people deserve a more moderate Supreme Court. We do not want a Supreme Court that leans heavily to the left or heavily to the right. And since now, what happened was with this nuclear option. Now, what happened in 2013 was Democrats unleashed the nuclear option only for federal district court appointees, but not for Supreme Court. And Mitch McConnell said, I want to play this video for you. Mitch McConnell said this at the time.
Once again, Senate Democrats are threatening to break the rules of the Senate, in order to change the rules of the Senate. I don't think the American people are fooled about this. If our colleagues want to work with us to fill judicial vacancies like we've been doing all year, 99% of judges confirmed, obviously we're willing to do that. If you want to play games, set yet another precedent that you'll no doubt come to regret. Say to my friends on the other side of the aisle, you'll regret this, and you may regret it a lot sooner than you think.
So he was absolutely right. You're going to regret this, and sooner than you think. And so what Republicans did was they said, oh, so you've changed the rules. And, oh, yeah, you changed the rules and you stopped short at the Supreme Court. But you know what? Since you changed the rules, we're going to go ahead and up the ante. Why not Supreme Court justices? If we're going to change the rules, let's just go all the way. So Republicans did. They went all the way. And now, ever since Gorsuch, they had a simple majority in nominating Supreme Court justices. This is a travesty of the largest kind for the American people. This should have never happened in 2013. I blame Democrats for unleashing this rule. And now here we are. And justices, whether they be right or left, I don't want anybody on that Supreme Court who is ideologically far in either direction. It's a disaster. And through time, as we get more and more of these Supreme Court nominees who are ideologically extreme, it's only going to be a problem for the people, for the country, for unity, for the country. It's just going to be an absolute disaster. So previously, presidents needed to pick somebody who was a bit more moderate in order to get that 60 vote threshold. And now they don't need that. That is a big problem. The Senate is, every state, no matter the population, gets 2 senators. So oftentimes you'll have senators, half of the senators that are voting in one way are coming from very the states with low populations. And so they're not representative of the people. That's not what the body of the Senate is for. The Senate is for the federation and for maintaining states' rights and understanding that we are a federation of 50 states. We are not a one country with a one country system. And again, that's something Democrats want to change. Democrats would like to see the Senate turn more like into the House, where it is based on population, that if you're a bigger state like California, you should get more senators. Bad idea, guys. It always will come back to bite you. Always. The founding fathers set up our system with a vision in mind for a reason. They did not envision a one country system. They envisioned a federation of small countries, essentially, the states that are joined together in certain aspects. Their real vision was those certain aspects were for military and for trade. It was so that, you could trade freely with the states and the states would come together in a united purpose for defense. Through time, the federal government has grown larger. That has been the ideological tug of war between Democrats and Republicans Republicans have traditionally wanted to maintain states' rights. Democrats have traditionally wanted to create a larger, more overarching federal government. You don't want that, guys. You don't. Because at the end of the day, if a conservative majority is in power in the federal level, suddenly those of us who live in liberal states would have to live under a more conservative ruling. Luckily, right now, the states are governing your lives. Your life is much more contingent. The quality of your life, the rules of your life, the regulation of your life are much more contingent on who is in your state level government, not in the federal government. So I'm always one. Now, if you've watched the show for a long time, you know that I am one that always pushes back on these ideas of abolishing the Electoral College, eliminating the filibuster, eliminating, essentially states' individuality in favor of a more federal government. I always shy away from that. I don't think it's a good idea. And I think right now we're seeing why that's a bad idea, why rule changes, fundamental rule changes, eventually come back to haunt you. So, bad idea, but, okay, listen, let's move on with this. Now that the damage is done, the problem is now they only need 51 votes in order to get their Supreme Court nominee through. The damage has been done after 2013. Democrats are now kind of upping it and saying that nothing is off the table. Here's Nancy Pelosi talking about, what are we going to do to stop it? Because they've lost the ability for the 60-vote supermajority. They got rid of that in 2013. They're left with little ammo on how to stop an ultra-conservative nominee from getting onto the bench. And so now Nancy Pelosi is saying, well, maybe impeachment. This was something that was discussed during George Stephanopoulos' show. It was definitely, hypothetical. But anyway, here it is.
You said you want people to get out there and vote, but even that's no guarantee that the White House and Senate Republicans won't try to push through a Supreme Court nomination in a lame duck session, even if Joe Biden wins on November 3rd, even if Democrats pick up seats in the House and maybe even the Senate. So what can you do then? Some have mentioned the possibility, if they try to push through a nominee in a lame duck session, that you and the House could move to impeach President Trump or Attorney General Barr as a way of stalling and preventing the Senate from acting on this nomination?
Well, we have our options. We have arrows in our quiver that I'm not about to discuss right now.
But to be clear, you're not taking any arrows out of your quiver. You're not ruling anything out.
Good morning. Sunday morning. We have a responsibility. We take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. We have a responsibility to meet the needs of the American people. That is when we weigh the equities, protecting our democracy requires us to use every arrow in our quiver.
Once again, it's stupid. It's a bad idea to set a precedent that ultimately is going to come back to bite you in the arse. If you go down this road of saying, let's just impeach in order to stop a U.S. Supreme Court nominee from going through, You're going to set a precedent that you're not going to like. And ultimately, it's not even going to work. Here's Ross Garber. He's a political investigations and impeachment lawyer. So he's an impeachment expert. And he says impeachment wouldn't slow the Senate down. There's no requirement that an impeachment trial precludes all other Senate business or that a trial occupy much Senate time at all. Remember, Trump impeachment trial had no witnesses. So he's saying they can do two things at once. If you're going to try to attempt to impeach Trump or impeach William Barr or impeach somebody in order to slow the Senate down, it won't work. They're going to see right through it. And Republicans hold the Senate. And so they're just going to sidestep it by just saying, okay, we'll have some of our time here and some of our time there. It's not going to work. And it would be just ultimately a very bad move for the country. Bad. We're already hyper-partisan. We're already so split. It's a bad idea. So I think we're going to have to face some facts. And the fact is that it is very likely that Trump, his nominee, whoever that person is likely to be ultra-conservative, and that person is going to get through. That person will sit on the Supreme Court, and it will be a 6-3 conservative-leaning Supreme Court. I think we all have to live with that fact. So, that being said, how afraid should we be? That's a big question. I'm hoping I'm going to quell some of your fears. Now, the court has been conservative-leaning for the last 50 years. It has been conservative-leaning since, I believe, 1972. Nixon got 4 Supreme Court appointees. And from the time of Nixon, so in the 50s through the mid-50s, all through the 60s, the court was more liberal-leaning. Previously, before that, it was a conservative court. Then it was a liberal-leaning court for about 15 years. The Warren Court is what they call it. And then it shifted and became a conservative court once again. And it's been conservative for about 50 years. And during this time of the conservative, now it hasn't only been a 5-4 conservative majority, which is what we've had over the last several years. There were times when it was a 6-3 conservative majority. And I just want to remind, now when the Warren Court ended and when Nixon got his 4 Supreme Court nominees, a lot of people were very, very worried about what would happen to civil rights. There were a lot of civil rights legislation, or a lot of civil rights rulings, I should say, that the Supreme Court ruled on throughout the 60s that were primarily about segregation. And those people were very worried that all of those civil rights that had been gained would be lost in suddenly this Burger court, which was more conservative. And then, of course, there was the Rehnquist court, all these conservative courts. A lot of people feared for these civil rights. And you know what? It didn't happen. The rules were not reversed. Now, there are some littler things here and there that do get reversed, but overall, the big civil rights rulings were not overturned. Those fears were unfounded, and I believe that they are again. Since 1972, we've actually seen under these conservative courts quite a bit of movement and progress. Throughout the 70s, we saw a lot of progress with gender discrimination for women's rights. We saw lots and lots of legislation that ended up in the court, and the court ruled to the benefit of women throughout the 70s. We've seen in these conservative courts for the last 50 years, same-sex marriage be pushed through, abortion rights. Remember, Roe v. Wade was actually determined under a conservative court. And the ruling ended up being 7-2. I believe it was a 7-2 ruling. And the two that actually ruled against Roe v. Wade were the dissent. The two, one was a liberal justice and one was a conservative. So it really didn't even matter on that case. We've seen recent rulings for DACA and more abortion rights and even the LGBTQ protections, which not only had a larger majority than a 5-4 in the ruling, the recent protections that included LGBTQ in sex discrimination. Not only was that ruled, and Gorsuch, for example, sided with the liberals as well as Roberts. Gorsuch actually wrote the majority opinion on that one, and he was a Trump appointee. So I don't think we should worry too much about what is going to happen with these protections, even if there is a very ultra-conservative justice who sits on the court. They don't rule the same way as politicians govern. They're not beholden to the voters. They're not worried about what their constituents think. They don't have them. This is a lifetime appointment. Once they're there, they can go rogue, as Trump has seen numerous times with Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, much to his dismay. So I don't think we're going to see suddenly this overturning of legislation. But let's just go forward and say, let's just say they undo everything. That suddenly this court is so extremely ultra-conservative that they undo every protection for everybody. What would this mean? Well, worst comes to worst, if they reversed everything, all it means is if you live in a liberal state, nothing. It means nothing would happen to you. If you're in a liberal state, nothing changes whatsoever. And ironically, the people that are up in arms most about potential conservative-leaning court are people from liberal states, where in these liberal states, they're already protected by legislation in that state. Your state legislation often overrides whatever the courts might do. So the courts, most of the time, what they're doing is they're saying whether or not federal government can use federal powers to enact certain laws. And when let's say they were to overturn Roe v. Wade, for example, does that mean you as a woman suddenly lose your right to choose? No, it doesn't if you live in a liberal state. Now, if you live in a conservative state like Alabama or Georgia, you might actually lose your right to choose. In that case, what you would need to do is try to change the legislation in your state. You would need to lobby your politicians. You would need to become an activist. You would need to do what you can to change your state's laws. That's how progress is made largely on a lot of things in this country, is that you go to your state and you say, I want to live in a state that affords me certain protections and rights. If you do not live in a state like this and you don't want to live and you feel like you are being hindered in ways, you do have the right as an American citizen to move freely to any other state in the union. You can choose to live in a more liberal state. Now, I think that this, let's just say worst comes to worst and this were to happen, and there was just this day where every protection is just undone by this ultra-conservative Supreme Court. I think ultimately what would happen is you'd see a lot of businesses say to certain states that are undoing protections, they would say to them, look, we're going to pull our company out of here because our employees don't want to live in a state, or we can't attract talent to come and move to a state that has very backwards laws when it comes to gay marriage or women's abortion rights or whatever it might be. We don't, our employees, we're not going to attract talent, so we just can't set up headquarters in your state. You're going to see a lot of that happen, and states are going to be pressured to change their laws. You'll have more activists, people that are just becoming more and more enlightened as time go on. They're going to lobby their state's governments. They're going to get into office, and they're going to vote, and they can vote to change the laws. Now, justices are often feeling very, as it is, especially Chief Justice Roberts, often express their dismay at the fact that they're being asked to legislate from the bench. They feel like, look, you want gay marriage? Put it into law. You want protections for women's choice, human reproduction rights? Then put it in law. Make a law. Better yet, put it in the Constitution. Make an amendment. If it's that popular, add it to the Constitution. That way, as a justice, when we are interpreting law based on the Constitution, and the Constitution clearly says that gays have the right to marry and women have the right to choose their reproductive choices, make choices with their reproductive health, it's in the Constitution, and we have to interpret as written in the Constitution. So the justices say, we hate the fact that we're being asked to legislate by the bench. Roberts is often writing this in his opinions. He's often sort of signaling to this, and that's just the reality of it. We have a checks and balances system in this country, and even when the Supreme Court, which they've done time and time again, made bad decisions, we have the option as in a checks and balances system, to put checks and balances even on that Supreme Court and to overrule them using legislation. We can do that when it comes to Citizens United, which I believe desperately needs to be done. We absolutely need to get Congress to overturn Citizens United. That was ruled on by the Supreme Court. And you know what? That's not the end all be all. We can lobby our Congress to make that change. We have a checks and balances system on that Supreme Court. So worst comes to worst, what it really means is if that horrible day were to come where everything's reversed and we all lose all of our protections, it just means we have to turn to our states and tell our states to make better laws. We need to turn to Congress and say, you guys have to stop being an ineffective, terrible branch of government. Congress is the worst branch of government. And we'd say to them, look, you have to turn it around and you need to start making some legislation that actually helps the people of America. That's what would need to happen. So hopefully this somewhat quelled your fears a little bit, answered some of your questions. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, the links are down below. Thank you for watching.